Good morning, everyone. Today, I have the privilege of introducing to you the 15 sets of artworks that have been identified by our curators as the masterpieces and iconic works of the Asian Art Museum. As Anne had mentioned, with the collection's 50th anniversary coming up next year in 2016, this exercise is proving to be extremely timely. Over the next 14 weeks, each scholar will focus on one artwork that I'm introducing today, and they will delve into its mysteries, offering a more complex and complete picture of each artwork, more than I can provide today. And so, if you look at the list on your study guide, the list spans thousands of years and thousands of miles. So needless to say, I will borrow very liberally from my colleagues' expertise to highlight the many and varied aspects that make each of these artworks on the list a masterpiece or an iconic work. So the way that it's organized, we will start with the 9 sets of masterpieces and then continue with the 6 iconic works. So the first one on the list of our masterpieces is, of course, our ritual vessel in the shape of a rhinoceros, or our bronze rhino. It's more than 3,000 years old, and it's arguably the most famous object in the Asian Art Museum's collection. And also, according to our director, Jay Shu, to his knowledge, no other museum or private collection has such a wonderful work of art in the shape of a rhino. It portrays a lively and powerful animal naturalistically with a straightforward and natural charm. Now, the bronze rhino is rare and important for a number of reasons. So very few Chinese vessels made during the Bronze Age were in the form of an animal. And those that were in animal shape featured surface decorations such as linear patterns or other animals attached to their bodies. So our rhino, having an undecorated surface, is undoubtedly rare. So you can say it's the only one of its kind. Now, this object is ultimately a very realistic piece of sculpture. We can forgive a slight exaggeration in the roundness of its belly and muzzle, and also there's a shade of stylization in the treatment of its eyes. But, the folds of the skin is indicated on the shoulder, on the jaw, behind the ears, and also the hooves are clearly depicted in a natural way. Now here's a photo of the Sumatran rhinoceros. There is no conclusive evidence that the two-horned rhino ever lived in China proper, but this species can be found in a wide area of Southeast Asia. And so it is the most likely species that this sculpture is based upon. And so when you have a side-by-side comparison like this, the similarities are uncanny. And actually, for those of you who may not know, we are currently launching a Name the Rhino contest. And my vote was for Suma, a nickname for the Sumatran rhinoceros. Now, as I'm going through our masterpieces list and highlighting their special features, I hope that many of the things that I'm saying is actually not new to you, which would be great, because that's indicative of the fact that these works are already out there, that our visitors, our audience is already familiar with them. And that is great. That means we're doing our job. And so another important piece of information about the rhino is the inscription that is found in the cavity of its belly. And so the inscription was cast at the same time as the rhino itself, and it records the name of a lesser minister who received a royal gift, and it was dated to the 15th year of the king. And so scholars have used these numbers to date the vessel to the last king of the Shang dynasty, so around the 11th century BCE. So our director, Jay Shu, will be speaking on the rhino in a couple of weeks, and his lecture is titled A Unique Pair, the Bronze Rhino and its collector, Avery Brundage. And so, this gives you an indication of, in a way, how the object that is collected can then reflect the collector's sensibility. And so, since our bronze rhino is unique in the world thus far, what does that say about its collector, Avery Brundage? And so, Jay will be detailing that more. Our second masterpiece is this 10th century stone sculpture, the Buddha triumphing over Mara. So it features an image of the Buddha on the threshold of enlightenment. Now, Susan Huntington will be speaking on this piece, and she will be going into more detail about the form and meaning in Buddhist art as exemplified by this sculpture. And so there are many signs here pointing to the Buddha to be's special qualities. He has a lump on his head, symbolizing his extra insight. On the palms of his hands and the soles of his feet are also symbols marking a kind of being who's more advanced and more powerful than a regular human being. And his right hand is touching the base of the throne, and we understand that symbolically to be him touching the earth, which signifies that he has overcome the last obstacles to attaining Buddhahood. And then, in the large halo, there's a statement that appears in Sanskrit. It is essentially the fundamental statement of Buddhism, or the Buddhist creed. It reads, "The Buddha has explained the cause of all things that arise from a cause. He, the great monk, has also explained their cessation." So by inscribing the Buddhist creed on this sculpture, it infuses the actual Buddha image with the message of the Buddha. Our next set of masterpieces is this pair of the Hindu deities Shiva and Parvati. Now, these figures are rare for a number of reasons. They are undoubtedly of the highest quality as works of sculpture. They are rendered with a combination of realism and idealization. And aside from obvious losses, such as the hands and Shiva's leg, they actually have survived in excellent condition. And also, there are some original pigment that has remained on the surface. And finally, while other pairs or groupings of sculptures have separated, this pair has remained together intact since the 11th century. And so one of the qualities that make this pair extraordinary is the fact that they are intricately carved, and the details are precise and meticulous. There's a wonderful contrast of their smooth, polished skin with the intricate clothing and jewelry. And so these sculptures are up in the galleries right now. And so we encourage everyone, hopefully after this intro lecture, to go see many of these pieces. And of course, due to the light sensitivity nature of the paintings that I'll be introducing, they will most likely only be up the week of the lecture that they are being featured. And so that will be your opportunity to then go see them before the lecture or even after the lecture. But these sculptures are already up in the galleries. And so in addition to the carving of these sculptures, they're also important because they reflect a major change in the formal way that deities have been portrayed during this period. So, prior to the 10th century, in Angkor, deities have been portrayed as mighty and distant from mortals. But here, they appear more human. They appear as young, attractive, kind, and understanding. Now, our curator, Forrest McGill, will be speaking on this pair in an upcoming lecture. And his lecture is titled The Divine Royal Couple. So when we had the director of the National Museum of Phnom Penh come visit, he took a look at these sculptures, and he posed the question. These sculptures are depicting Shiva and Parvati. We know that it is Shiva because of the third eye here on his forehead. But he asked, could these sculptures also represent the king and queen in the form of deities? Because they are imbued with so much more humanity. There's a balance of realism and idealization that would have been perfect for royal representation. However, can the pair be compared to the ancient Greek gods like Apollo or Aphrodite, asked Forrest, whose physical beauty and approachability is part of what attracts us to them? Now, these sculptures are dated to about the 10th and the 11th century. So before and after the period of these sculptures, art coming from the Angkor kingdom usually, as I said, emphasized the remoteness of the gods. However, in the late 900s, and continuing for several generations thereafter, gentleness and sensitivity were more often emphasized. And so the Asian Art Museum's Shiva and Parvati perfectly embody these new tendencies and trends. So our next masterpiece is this Korean ewer with lid. It dates to the Goryeo dynasty. And Goryeo dynasty ewers are often derived from the natural forms, such as melons or double gourds. This ewer, however, was based on a metal prototype. And its lid, which is in the form of a double lotus, and it has a jewel on top, provides an intriguing contrast to the simple, unadored lines of the body. And the beauty of this form, and also of its exquisite glaze, the glaze is thin, and it's transparent and lustrous, makes this piece an exemplary of the highest aesthetic quality that was sought after by the court and the aristocracy during the Goryeo dynasty. Furthermore, another indication of the high quality of this Celadon piece is the fact that the glaze also covers the bottom of the base, and the foot ring is carefully wiped. You can also see indications of the three spurs from which the piece was placed on while it was being fired. You see two of them here under the glaze. So during the nearly 5 centuries of the Goryeo dynasty from 918 to 1392, Celadon was the main type of ceramics produced on the Korean peninsula. Now, actually, the advent of Celadon represents a major technological and conceptual shift in the history of Korean ceramics. So the technology of the glaze and the kiln structure was actually adapted from China. And when Goryeo potters were able to attain a certain level of technical and aesthetic expertise, this changed the way that the aesthetics of what a Celadon should be. So that color becomes an important element in this transformation. And then also what was also prized was how designs were interpreted and how forms and decorations were interpreted. So as I said, Goryeo potters learned much from the technical expertise of the Chinese potters. And so we see in early Goryeo examples, such as actually the ewer, a conscious emulation of certain stylistic features that were prominent in Sung Dynasty Chinese ceramics, such as in Ru ware and these two examples, yuer vessels. So a Sung envoy who visited the Goryeo capital in 1123 noted the resemblance of Goryeo ceramics to Chinese Ru and yuer vessels. However, later, as Goryeo Celadon achieved its apogee, a subsequent Chinese writer wrote that Goryeo Celadon he considers, quote, the first under heaven. And so our curator, Hyunjung Kim Han, will be speaking on this Celadon, on this ewer, in further detail, and the title of her lecture is also The First Under Heaven. And so you will learn more about Goryeo Celadon, but yet I suspect that she will be talking about this unique Korean technique for inlaid Celadon. So by the mid-12th century, Goryeo potters and patrons they moved away from emulating Chinese styles and motifs and tastes to interpreting native tastes. And so we can say that the culmination of Goryeo Celadon can be seen in a new technique called Sangam, or inlaid Celadon, which was a rarity in China. So the technique of Sangam involves carving out the desired design on the dry clay body of the vessel, filling that carved out space with either black or white slip, and then you apply the transparent glaze, and then you fire the vessel. So, the best of Goryeo inlaid Celadon is breathtaking with its presentation of clean form, of the subtle yet vibrant design of white, black, and green, that color combination. Now, this masterpiece, I think, will be new to many of us here. It is a painting, a genre of painting called chikuri, which in Korean, chek is translated as books and guri as things. So chekuri literally means books and things. And excuse my pronunciation. And so this painting depicts a bookcase, and many types of objects are in it. Definitely books, brushes, brush holders, bronzeware, other types of metalware, porcelain, peacock feathers, corals, fruits, and other curiosities. So essentially, these objects were things that a scholar either had in his study or that he wanted to have near him. Not only are they related to his studies, but they are also symbolic. And so the meanings were especially suited for a ruler or a scholar who was living and practicing in a Confucian society that was the Joseon dynasty of Korea at this time. And so actually these chicory screens are still being used today in special celebrations for, such as a boy's birthday. Now most of the existing chicory screens are from the 19th century, such as our screen. However, the tradition really flourished in the late 18th century under the reign of King Jeongjo of the Joseon dynasty. King Jeongjo was he was a learned man. He was an avid bibliophile. He was a curious scientist, a strong art patron, and an accomplished artist himself. Written records indicate that he was particularly passionate about the chicory genre, so much so that he required a question about this painting in every examination question, in every examination test that was used to select court officials. And he was also known to have added comments to paintings of chicory by famous artists. And so compared to other chicory screens that are extant, the Asian Art Museum's screen actually has all the characteristics that prove it was made at the court or for an owner in the upper class. So definitely careful attention to details for depicting a realistic sense of space and volume, and also the materiality of the objects. So the bindings of the books are clearly depicted. You can see cracks on the ceramics. And also, you can see moisture of wet ink on the inkstone. Now, in addition to this meticulousness of detail, another reason why this piece is considered a masterpiece is the fact that there is a hidden artist signature on this screen. And it is right here. It is this red seal, painted red seal here. So it was not customary for a court painter to sign his paintings, especially when they were commissioned by a king. However, what he would do would be to take his seal and imprint his seal on the painting. So in this screen, what the artist did was sort of play with that. So instead of imprinting his seal onto the painting, he decided to paint an imprint of his seal on the painting. And so there actually aren't many chicory screens that have artist signatures in this playful way. However, this example from the Samsung Museum in Liam has a similar hidden artist signature, and it's comparable to our piece in terms of arrangement and style. And then this other example from the Gyeonggi Provincial Museum in Korea also has an artist signature. Now, this masterpiece is perhaps the smallest on our list of masterpieces. It is a Jade Cup from the Timurid time period. It has a translucent white nephrite body. It has a simple yet elegant shape, and most importantly, the rhythmic movement of the calligraphy of the two main inscriptions on the body of this cup make it a beautiful object, despite its very small size. And it's currently up in the West Asian Gallery right now. So historically, this cup is one of only 3 known jade vessels produced for rulers of the Timurid dynasty, which was from 1370 to 1506. And we know from the second inscription that it was then later owned by the Mughal Emperor Jahangir. So the Timurids were the descendants of Timur or Tamerlane. And they were the first Islamic dynasty to actually use nephrite, or what we call jade, seriously as an artistic medium. So the cup mains inscription tells us that it was first commissioned by the great-grandson of Tamerlane. Then later in 1621, it made its way to the collection of Jahangir, who then had it inscribed as well. Jahangir, besides being a connoisseur and active patron of the arts himself, he actively collected imperial Timurid art. And this was, as our curator, Kamar Aramji, will attest to later in her lecture, that by collecting imperial Timurid art, Jahangir was effectively building his ancestral heritage, connecting himself to Tamerlane. And we also know that he loved to have his name inscribed in, on his jade collection, so our example is no exception. Now, our white jade cup is rare in the sense that most existing Timurid jades are green in color, such as this one also in the Avery Brundage collection. So the use of white nephrite is rare. The only other known example in white nephrite is this jug in the Gulbenkian Foundation in Lisbon, which interestingly was also part of Jahangir's jade collection. So the two inscriptions on the cup, one naming the 15th century patron and then the 17th century owner, further make this piece an important and rare document of history and material culture for this time period. So this pair of sculptures depicts Brahma and Indra, or Bonten and Taishakuten, respectively in Japanese. So Brahma and Indra were Hindu deities brought into Buddhism as attendants of the Buddha or of the Bodhisattva. So this pair of sculptures are important for several reasons. First, they were made specifically for Kofukuji Temple in Nara, Japan. So Kofukuji was one of the most important temples in Nara during the 8th century. And this pair specifically stood in the West Golden Hall, which actually is no longer in existence. And the second reason why this pair is a masterpiece is the fact that they were made using the hollow dry lacquer technique, which was an ancient method that was only in use in Japan for about 100 years, and it produced lightweight, portable sculptures. So the technique begins with a clay core, and since Bonten and Taishakuten are nearly life-size, the clay core was also reinforced by wood scaffolding. And so once the clay core is built, layers of textile are dipped in lacquer and then applied to the figure. in several layers. Once the lacquer textile is dry, the figure is then cut open, usually with just a little panel in the back. The clay core removed, the old wooden scaffolding removed, and possibly another one was added. A new one was added for reinforcement. Then the panel that was cut away was replaced, and the finishing layers of lacquer was added on. And then once the whole piece is dry, you can decorate it and gild it as desired. And so the museum's Bonten and Taishakuten are the only large-scale Japanese hollow dry lacquer sculptures in the United States from this period, the Nara period, and that they are a matching set. Even in Japan, sculptures like these are extremely rare, and if they are in existence, then they have already been named national treasures or important cultural properties. In addition to this, the collecting and conservation history of these two sculptures also add to their importance in our collection. So as I said, they were made specifically for Kofukuji Temple. And unfortunately, the West Golden Hall in which they were housed saw several fires. And the sculptures had escaped almost all the fires, even the one in 1180, which actually destroyed the West Golden Hall. So what you see here now, what is still standing, is the East Golden Hall. So in 1906, when the temple sought to raise funds for repairs, they decided to sell many of their treasures. And actually, our Bonten and Taishakuten were two of the treasures that were up for sale, as seen in this historical photograph. So if you look at the photograph, you see that the two sculptures had missing parts, hands, and heck, even this one has a missing head. So this was taken in 1906. When Avery Brundage bought the pair in the early 1960s, they were complete. And so the mystery has been, the question has been, well, by the time that Brundage bought them, were the parts, the completed parts, were they original or were they restorations or new 20th century pieces? So for the longest time, scholars thought that they were most likely 20th century replacement pieces. However, recently, research that was conducted by Japanese scholars and our own museum staff, they came to the conclusion that actually many of those parts are original. And so, especially the parts where, especially in the places where pieces have been wired on. So here in this X-ray, you can see the indications where pieces were wired back on. So this is the head of Taishakuten. And he has a concentration of wired pieces. And so these indicate where the original parts were then reattached to the sculpture. And so this strongly suggests that, at the very least, Taishakuten's head was original, and we also have X-rays indicating that many other parts of the sculpture's bodies are original. And definitely the clothing and the paint, the pigment that has remained on the two sculptures are also original. The 338 Buddha. So I'm sure many of you know why the 338 Buddha is important. It is the earliest known Chinese Buddhist sculpture dated by inscription. It is actually among the very largest bronze sculptures to have survived from this period. It's nearly 16 inches tall. And it can be used to talk about new casting technology that was available during this time period. And very recently, our former curator, Michael Knight, has come to associate this sculpture with fascinating peoples and events that shaped the growth of Buddhism in China at this time. So essentially, the importance of this sculpture lies in its fragmentary inscription on the back of the base. It dates this piece to 338. And this is the earliest date inscribed on any Buddha sculpture from China, not just here in our museum, but anywhere in the world. And so how did the 338 Buddha get to China at this time? Primarily, it was Buddhist missionary monks from Central Asia who brought images of the Buddha to China. One monk in particular played a key role that helped to shape this massive shift in northern China. So around 310, northern China fell under the control of a non-Chinese people called the Jie from Central Asia. The Jie used the spread of Buddhism as justification to their right to rule the Chinese population. So at the center of this effort was a man named Shele, who became the ruler of the Jie. And his principal religious advisor, a monk named Fo Tudong. He was a charismatic Buddhist monk who was born in Kucha. And so Fo Tudong was one of this initial wave of missionary monks who came to China to find converts. So Fo Tudong taught a form of Buddhism that was focused on meditation. And so the images that he brought with him to China were those of meditating Buddhas. And this is one, and our 338 Buddha definitely portrays the Buddha in meditation. And so we get every indication that Fo Tudong was successful in his venture. He converted thousands of people in the northern part of China, and he established nearly 900 monasteries. Now, further evidence of the widespread popularity of this form of Buddhism, focus on meditation, can be found in the wide distribution of these meditating Buddha sculptures. The majority of them are smaller than our 338 Buddha, such as these two examples you see here. And they were scattered from Dunhuang all the way to Korea. And so here we have two examples from the same time period at the Nelson Atkins Museum in the Ise Bunko in Tokyo. So this masterpiece was recently acquired just a couple of years ago by the Connoisseurs Council. It is a Tonka painting depicting the Buddhist Lama Tashipel. He is the first Lama to be depicted frontally like a Buddha in Tibetan art. And this is definitely one of the finest, if not the finest, early portraits of Tashipel. And so our curator of Himalayan art, Jeffrey Durham, will be speaking on this Tonka in an upcoming lecture. And he titled his lecture, Time Traveling in this Tonka. And so space and time are actually represented in a rich and complex way in this Tonka, which I will hope to summarize for you. But first, the Tonka actually belongs to the most important stylistic tradition in Tibetan art. that of the Takalua order. And actually, this tradition has stylistic ties to Nepal, to India and Eastern Tibet. And so, as Jeff says, it is one of the most beautiful cosmopolitan styles ever developed in the Himalayas, unquote. So the iconography of this painting is definitely complex and rich. And as I mentioned, it presents sort of like the interface, the fusion of not only a physical, historical realm, but also the realm of the visionary. So how does it do that? First, so you have Tashipel here in the center. And so around him are representations of his teaching lineage, and so his predecessors of the Takalua order. In addition to these earthly human beings, we also have representations of the guardians of the four quarters, which signify the presence of Mount Meru and mark this painting as a cosmogram. So now we are entering the visionary realm. But there's also a sense of play, lightheartedness to this Tonka painting. So right underneath the seated Tashipel, we enter once again into a physical, historical realm, and in the form of what Jeff describes as a monastery setting. And most likely it depicts the Takalua Monastery. So here we have the two golden stupas that belong to Tashipel's lineage predecessors. And then we also have three little tiny Tashipels smiling out of the windows of a reed hut. Now, on the reverse of this Tonka, there is a set of inscriptions that make this painting even more important. From this inscription, it allows us to actually place the painting in a precise space and time. And so Jeff has been able to establish a date for this Tonka between 1210 and 1273 for the production of the Tonka. And he was able to identify the Tonka's origin or place of provenance to the Rinpoche Monastery in Eastern Tibet, which was destroyed by 1951. So specifically, part of the inscription reads, quote, consecrated by the Lama Onpo Rinpoche of Taklong, unquote. Onpo was the fourth abbot of Takalua Monastery. When he was passed over for a promotion, he decided to leave Takalua Monastery and went east to Rinpoche. So here's just a photo of Rinpoche Monastery. So when Onpo left for Rinpoche, he took a number of sacred objects with him, including the Tashipel Tonka. When he consecrated the new monastery at Rinpoche in 1273, he also reconsecrated the Tashipel painting. So that's why we can date the Tonka painting to 1210 after Tashipel's death and before 1273, before it was reconsecrated. So the painting was made in between those 63 years. Now, the history of this painting actually places it in a very important growing corpus of artworks that were actually moved from Takalua Monastery to Rinpoche in Eastern Tibet. So, you know, that movement is pretty solid. However, our curator also did some more detective work to trace how this Tonka left Rinpoche and how it got to the US. And so we know from records that Rinpoche Monastery fell to China's People's Liberation Army in 1950. Records indicate that no Tonka paintings survived except for those artworks that were removed by the monks themselves for safekeeping. And so the mere fact that the Tashipel Tonka survives to this day strongly suggests that it was one of those refugee artworks that were removed and saved by the monks during the invasion. And so that was a brief overview of the 9 sets of masterpieces that are in our collection. Now, before we go on break, I actually want to now tackle the question, what is a masterpiece? Now, for those of you who have been taking notes, I'm sure you can tell me what were some of the key phrases, the key words that I used to describe our masterpieces. Shout out anything. Rare. Dated. Historical importance. Inscription. Inscribed. Yes, aesthetic quality. Beautiful. It's every one of those things and more. And, you know, we have the expert's opinion there, but I also decided to get a second opinion. And so I consulted the pop culture source, The Complete Idiot's Guide to What is an Art Masterpiece. And, you know, a masterpiece should be a supreme intellectual artistic achievement. It transcends its subject matter. Some sort of feeling must be evoked. There should be style, technique, balance, and harmony. And it should instill in us a sense of the infinite, the feeling that anything is possible. Now, these criteria are rather sublime, but you know, there is a saying that, you know, when you see a masterpiece, you know it when you see it. And so I've tried, you know, when I was doing my research on you know, what is a masterpiece, it is ridiculous how that topic actually is not directly covered. There's not much research out there that will directly challenge or confront this topic. And so on your reading list, I provided 2 articles coming from a philosophical angle and then from a science angle. So it was very interesting for me to read them. And essentially, you know, all joking aside, ultimately, what constitutes a masterpiece is a personal judgment. And historically, we know that the term masterpiece actually referred to a piece of work produced by an apprentice or journeyman to become a master craftsman in the old European guild system. So essentially similar to what a doctoral dissertation is today. So it means that, you know, if you put enough effort and practice into something, you can become a master, you can create your masterpiece. However, we know that in modern day usage, the word masterpiece is used freely and liberally to talk about from food to technology to, you know, a hairstyle. And so I also include in your reading list 2 websites where you can find out more about how Japan and Korea have both devised a systematic way of ranking their cultural properties and heritage properties. And so, you know, their highest ranking of national treasure or important cultural properties are equivalent to what can be considered a masterpiece. And so as far as I'm aware, the United States does not have such a ranking system, so it's not very helpful for us. But to go along with you know, the argument that it is ultimately a personal judgment, these are the 9 sets that our curators have personally judged to be masterpieces. Thank you. Time for a break.